Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for tuning into another episode of Expose Cinema. We were gone for a few weeks, kind of recharging our batteries, but earlier this week we had the 2016, the first 2016 presidential debate, sparring match, slap fight, whatever you want to call it. And to kind of dissect that and where we're going with this election, we have the one and only Mr. David Stevenson from Progressive Soup.
Glad to be on. Thank you for inviting me.
Do you have any quick comments before we start of Progressive Soup, where people could find it? And I know Basil Budakat presents, which I think is right after us.
And the red shirt is actually because Basil is a Buddhist, as am I philosophically. We're both Christians, devout Christians religiously, and Buddhists philosophically. And but the red is the homage to Buddhism. But Basil Budakat is on Facebook, Basil Budakat, and Progressive Soup's on Facebook, Progressive Soup, both on YouTube. Kristen40, Kristin 40, and Basil's been doing his show for 4.5 years, and I've been doing my show for about 7.5 years now.
Progressive Soup's been on that long?
Yeah, since 2009, late spring, early summer. We were blessed by a fellow by the name of Walt Herzinchik, who had a show called Earth Matters, by being given his
I've
show.
played some of his stuff, but I've only met him in passing once, basically.
Yeah, good man. He passed. It's been a number of years since he passed, but before he passed, he gave us his show, and we turned it into Progressive Soup, and haven't looked back since. Again, as you say, we're here in the middle of a presidential debate where one candidate lied about her opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the other candidate lied about everything, pretty much everything.
Well, I watched online because I didn't want to give the news channels my viewership, but I think about 85 million people tuned in, if I got the math right. They were projecting about 100 million. But it was interesting. Gary Johnson and Jill Stein were both vying to get on the debate stage. Jill was, I think, at about 2%, 2 to 4%, and Gary Johnson was about 8 to 10%. So, but it would have been good seeing all four of them on there. But we only had Trump and Clinton. It was interesting for me when I watched. I saw the first half kind of dominated by Trump, just kind of how he normally is, where he comes in, he was interrupting Hillary Clinton anytime she wanted to answer a question. Immediately, though, anytime he was interrupted, oh, no, wait, you asked me a question, right? So he's got a glass jaw for anybody that interrupts him or attacks him, but he's more than willing to just slap you or pinch you or do whatever he can, because he's like that little bully in the schoolyard who, if you punch him in the face, he runs away crying.
Mike Tyson. Anybody ever followed boxing, knew of a guy named Mike Tyson.
You're about to say Mike Tyson's a weak little man?
About 20-ish years ago, Mike Tyson won 30 or 40 straight boxing matches and took all his opponents out in 10 seconds or less generally. Pretty much took them all out really quickly. Classic bully stance. He came forward. He was only able to fight coming forward. It was the first time he was faced by an opponent that pushed back and was able to make him back up. He got knocked out and was pretty much made a laughing stock of, which he's remained to this day. But there's your classic model of Donald Trump, the bully, the schoolyard bully, that will do anything and everything. Likes to insult people.
Wait. Donald Trump likes to insult people.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement to make.
Yeah.
That he likes to insult people and plays fast and loose with facts. He doesn't seem to have a whole lot of factual quivers in his arrows in his quiver.
Well, if for nothing else, he's a hell of a businessman.
No.
I will say businessman in the sense that he can play a room.
Yeah.
He knows how to market himself.
Yeah, he's a good politician.
Yeah.
Because what really separates a business person from a politician is pretty much pretty much nothing when you think about it. It's you know, it's peddling your product, and that's just pretty much well, he does it well. But if you look behind what he says, it's basically all contradictory and lies, and very little thought goes into it.
It seemed to me, and it seemed to me with the primaries too, everybody was kind of vetting this as, oh, I'm just going to fight another politician, or I'm just going to go into a primary with another politician, not crazy pants over here who's just going to yell and scream and stomp his feet and threaten to not be at a primary, or because I think he said he didn't want moderators there, even though the moderator didn't really do a hell of a lot to begin with, because people were talking over their time limit, and everybody was interrupting one another. But it just seems like everybody was testing themselves, or what's the word I'm looking for? Was looking at this as, oh, I'm just going to go at another politician. That's why if you look at Hillary Clinton's facial expressions, she had this kind of veneer smile on. And she was looking at this like, okay, he's going to talk for X number of minutes, then I'm going to talk for X number of minutes, and then we're just going to go back and forth. But you could see every time he was interrupting her, she was getting more and more annoyed. And then near the tail end of the first half, she kind of started picking up, and then she kind of started wailing on Donald Trump about his taxes, about a lot of different things, about him not paying any federal taxes for 1 year, despite the fact he says, oh, that just makes me smart, which basically makes everybody else dumb for paying taxes. So he's basically calling the rest of America dumb.
Fair. That's a fair statement,
Did you see, well, I know you had said there was a Democracy Now! I don't know too much about Democracy Now!, but that Jill Stein had a kind of tit-for-tat with Democracy Now!, essentially a debate, and essentially given the same time frame?
They, Democracy Now!, which is on, it's, well, I get it on, I don't get cable, but I get it on probably it's somewhere amongst Hulu and the rest of the other stuff that I get of the smorgasbord of 74 choices of movie channels and whatnot that I get, Netflix and that stuff, and pay considerably less, let's say, than cable. No disrespect to Comcast, or if you're also on Charter or Omni or any of the other stations. No disrespect to them, but they're very expensive, and it's a lot easier to get good television without paying nearly as much money. But I watch it on Democracy Now! Amy Goodman is the chief correspondent. She has a gentleman named Juan Gonzalez, and she has a newer assistant, correspondent also. I've forgotten her name, but
is
she
Juan
had
Gonzalez the guy on Fox News?
No, different Juan Gonzalez. But they had some of the questions that they asked of the two major candidates, the ones that were actually at the debate, and then gave Jill Stein the 2 minutes to speak on those, to answer those questions also, which was very nice to have. And it would have been great if Gary Johnson were there, because aside from the Washington Post and other media outlets trying to mop the floor with the guy because he thought Aleppo was an acronym rather than a city in Syria, and they never let him get off the floor for that one, basically. It would have been good to have him there to talk about it, because as we talked about prior to coming on the air, he has a very good track record as a governor of New Mexico. He's a libertarian, but he's not
Anarchist libertarian.
He's much brighter and much more articulate than Donald Trump, certainly, and light years more honest, I think, than either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, as is Jill Stein. Much brighter, much more articulate, and certainly much more honest, and not a hawk like either Trump or Clinton.
Well, Clinton's already said, and she's already indicated, that she would have a more hawkish foreign policy than Barack Obama, who potentially had a more hawkish policy than George Bush.
Well, she got Obama to go into Libya and attack Libya, which was, here's someone that admitted that she was wrong about voting for the invasion and occupation of Iraq, and then she just repeated that process with Libya, and look what that's done. Certainly invading and occupying Iraq started the whole process of 3-4 million refugees out of Iraq into Jordan and Syria, which caused the problems in Syria, which have led to the Syrian refugees being chased out of their own country by a war. And likewise Libya, which was a horrific, this nation-building stuff that neoconservatives and neoliberals,
which they've pushed for
common denominator, invade countries and try to dominate the world, both of them, both groups.
And then steal the natural resources.
As a sidelight, steal the natural resources. But you had the same thing in Libya as you had in Iraq. You had a dictator, but by removing that dictator, you caused an instability that at least wasn't there when you had a dictator, and allowed elements, progressively worse elements, and I don't mean progressive in a positive sense, but progressively worse elements, Al Qaeda, and now ISIS or ISIL, or however you want to, whatever acronym you want to use for them. You get progressively more dangerous groups that come to power because of a leader in a country being ousted by the United States of America.
And what's interesting is we're not going out there seemingly to oust them, put them on trial, and then go in and put our people in. We're in there just kill them, which is an assassination.
Yep.
And then somehow that's legal, even though a lot of times we're not even declaring war. We're just going in under quote-unquote UN, which it's a foggy area sometimes. But as you said, Hillary Clinton voted for the Iraq War. You could make the argument that that was buried in another bill, so she had to vote for this, to vote for that, which is one of the reasons I've stated, why not just vote for every single bill by itself?
Good point, but I think it was pretty much a straight-up bill that gave President Bush the authorization to
he was already in there to begin with.
Well, it gave him the authorization to invade and occupy Iraq, to do anything under the cloak of fighting terrorism.
Yeah. Well, that's what always gets me. We're fighting terrorism. We're not fighting a state. We're fighting an idea. You can't fight really an idea versus fighting like Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan, because that's a defined geographic state versus an idea which can promulgate any place on the planet.
For you old codgers in the audience, you could think back to Korea, which is a little bit before my time, but not much. I was born during the Korean conflict. And you had an authorized use of force to try to fight a battle against, in that case it was communism, and now they've just taken communism out of the sentence and put in terrorism. But it's pretty much
Islamic
the same thing.
terrorism.
Well, yeah, but it's...
Because nowadays, if you don't say Islamic terrorism, then you hate the soldiers and you hate everybody under the sun.
Please. And, and as a side note to this incredible outflux of people from Syria, this huge numbers of refugees which have left Syria.
Who are fleeing terrorism, who aren't terrorists themselves.
Yeah, they're fleeing terrorism. They want to survive. And this sort of leads back to the thought of during the early days, before World War II in the 30s, when Hitler was marching through Europe and slaughtering what amounted to 6 million Jews, gays, gypsies, anybody that didn't fit Hitler's mold of what...
Even though he wouldn't have fit his own mold, but that's beside the point.
True that, but and you had boats full of Jewish people that escaped, boats full that came to the United States, and the boats were turned around and sent back because we didn't want Jewish people here, or we didn't want people fleeing for their lives from a country that was decimating them and murdering them, the same way you have now with the Syrian citizens, and it's the same thing over. And I don't think anybody would look back now, people that are against bringing Syrian refugees in would look back and say that it was right to turn those boats around and send Jews back to their slaughter. But it's basically what they want to do with Syrians.
Well, you can make the argument, I would say, for let's let a specific number of people in. And what that number might be is up to whoever. It might be 1 million, it might be 2 million, it might be 100,000. So I don't think there are people out there saying we'll just send them all. Well, there are. That we'll just send them all away. And then there are people saying, oh, well, let's just take everybody. Both of which I think are hard positions to sell. But if you're going to sell a position, I would say we'll let, like I said, a million people in.
Yeah.
And then, because we have a ton of space that we're not using, we have military installations or military towns, basically, that have been deserted, that we could put people up for X number of months or a year or so until you get paperwork and everything else sorted out. But would you see that as a viable solution?
Well, the Syrians that have been allowed to come here, and in spite of the fact that Mike Pence, the Republican vice presidential nominee, vetoed any notion of Syrian refugees going to Indiana, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of families that have gone there. And these folks that have come to America as Syrian refugees have a stellar record as human beings.
Oh, yeah.
And they've been vetted for 2 years in advance of coming here. They know everything about every one of them, and they vet every Syrian citizen that comes to America the same way that any citizen from any war-torn country is vetted completely. They're safe, they're good people, they're going to do like every other group of immigrants that have come to the United States. They'll assimilate in.
And a lot of times they assimilate faster than you think.
Well, they want to be Americans. Well, who the heck doesn't want to be an American? It's a great country.
Well, no, but everybody thinks that it's going to take you, years and years and years to assimilate into the U.S., but be Mexican, Muslim, what have you.
No.
A lot of people just assimilate like that.
Yeah, they want to be Americans. They want to be citizens. They want to work. They want to work hard. Looking back to the Cuban situation back in the 60s, when a lot of Cubans came to America to escape Fidel Castro, you had folks that you could have said the same thing about them. That you could have said, oh well, that cat. Matter of fact, my father, we lived in Miami, Florida, and my father was not very fond of Cubans. And God bless him, except for some of his racial and ethnic tendencies that were pretty bad. But it was my dad, so I love him. But a lot of people, including my dad, made the case that the Cubans coming to America were being sent here by Castro to destroy our country. Again, wrong, completely wrong. But it's no different than what they say about the Syrians, about Muslims coming here, about Syrians coming here, about any group that comes here. My Irish folks, my dad's parents came here from Ireland in the beginning of the 20th century, early 1900s. They were not treated the way that refugees and immigrants are treated now. They came here, they got off the boat, they had somebody here that knew them, that lived in Greenwich, that worked on the Warburg, the name was Warburg Estate, and they were off, quick check, they were in, they were American citizens very quickly. And that's the way it ought to be.
And what year was this?
Roughly 1910.
Oh, okay. Now, well, as you say, it's just simple fear-mongering because you turn on basically any channel, especially Fox News, and you'll see, oh, Muslims are bombing this country, Muslims are killing themselves, and they're going to go kill us. So we have to be afraid of that one Muslim in that group of 100 that might possibly sort of maybe have a fake passport.
Yeah.
Or we need to be terrified of prayer rugs that were found, they say found, it was actually like a soccer t-shirt or something, that was found in the Mexican desert. Even though I think there's a net loss of illegal immigrants for the last couple years, but we need to be afraid of all these different groups, so we need to pit each other against one another, because Donald Trump, again, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing Donald Trump is not going to get that big of a Latino vote. He's probably not going to get that big of a Muslim vote. He may get a good amount of women, depending on the type of woman.
Those that don't mind being called pigs.
Yeah.
And fat and ugly.
Yeah. Well, someone. But basically, he's shooting, it looks like, for basically straight white males, because he's talked about how he wants basically criminalize abortion. The Republican platform wants to basically make gay marriage illegal again.
Good luck with that.
Well, no, that's in their platform. But,
yeah, that's it's red meat for their followers.
Oh, yeah. But it's just it's a simple thing to get your fan base or your voters rabid against, and then they're going to come out. And a lot of times you have things, even though I agree with voter ID laws in theory, like I have no problem with going in and showing an ID. The problem is if you shut down a DMV in a certain section where predominantly black or Hispanic area is, they might not have the ability to get that ID because there are millions of people who don't have or don't need an ID for their day-to-day lives. So they then can't vote. So you're disenfranchising a certain population, like I said, be it Muslim, black, Hispanic, whatever.
Intentionally.
And then you're seeing a growth in your group, be it straight white males or straight white females or what have you. So you're going to see an uptick in you or your type of politician being elected versus another politician, be it liberal, be it conservative, be it what have you.
I wonder if anybody looks at members of the Ku Klux Klan as an example, or the or neo-Nazis, and look at them and say, "Wow, those horrible Christians," because they in fact define themselves as being devout Christians, and to me that's just insidious and insane. And then paint a picture of Christians based on these few people, these Ku Klux Klan members or neo-Nazis,
Well, you can say the
skinheads.
same thing about the
Sure.
Westboro Baptist people, and among others.
Yeah, you could look at a lot of microcosms of Christianity, and if you wanted to paint a very harsh picture of Christianity as a whole, if you really were that stupid and thought people were stupid enough to believe you, you could do that. And that's exactly what Trump and folks that hate Muslims and blame Muslims for all the bad in the world, exactly what they're doing to Islam. Islam is no better, no worse than Christianity, than Judaism, the basic tenets of all three major world religions, and the non-religions, atheism, agnosticism, all the different philosophical things. I guess maybe I shouldn't include what's the religion that
Hinduism?
No, the one that the actor belongs to.
Scientology?
Scientology. I don't know if maybe I shouldn't include.
Is that even classified as a religion?
I don't know. Maybe it is, but
I know they were fighting to be classified, but
the basic tenets of all these different religions and non-religions is good.
Yeah.
They're all good, and we shouldn't be. None of us should be lambasted for the few people amongst our group which are insane and horrific people.
Well, that's the simple way to do it. When you look at the other group, it's as you say, it's simple to say, oh, paint that broad brush, and that's why Donald Trump was vying for a Muslim database and a Muslim ban, which is completely unconstitutional. And then he stepped back and said, if you notice, when he was in the primary, Trump. He's a hardline Republican. He's going to, kick out all the Muslims, kick out all the illegal immigrants. He's going to do all these things. And then he becomes candidate Trump, and he slowly moves to the center. Oh, well, that was a suggestion. Oh, well, but he never really took back what he said about, like I said, we're going to ban them all for an undisclosed period of time till we can somehow get together and fix all the problems in our house, and then fix all the problems that they see somehow in the vetting process, or as you say, that takes 2 to 4 years.
2 years.
2 years. And you have to go through a number of different agencies, fill out hundreds of pages of paperwork to begin with.
And be interviewed by everybody and anybody and everybody that might have concern about your background or where you might stand, or what problems you might cause in America once you're here. But Donald Trump, keep in mind though, Donald Trump's been everywhere on every single issue. Except for misogyny. I guess he's been pretty consistent with that. He pretty much treats women like second-class citizens. But you name it, abortion, trade, all those things, healthcare, all those things.
Assault weapon ban.
He's been everywhere on every issue. So I question anybody believing anything he says based on past performance. Now, having said that, there's another candidate named Hillary Clinton that has a bit of a problem with the same thing. She's been in a lot of places on a lot of issues. And a fellow by the name of Jon Stewart, who had The Daily Show for 15, 16 years, I think he said it best when he talked about candidate Hillary Clinton. He said, the problem is I'm not sure what she really believes in. And going beyond that, he said, I'm not sure if she knows what she really believes in. And certainly the same can be said for Donald Trump. So that's why we have the two weakest candidates and the two most disliked candidates in memory.
Actually, speaking of that, I did find, I don't know if you had heard Bernie Sanders talking about voting on third party. This was recently, but I found a clip. It's only a couple minutes long.
Yeah.
This is actually a cross-section of a 1991 interview he had about voting third party, and in 2016, some of his comments now about voting third party, and what he calls a protest vote. And if we have that ready.
Before you cast a protest vote, because either Clinton or Trump will become president, think hard about it.
Debate after debate, television program after television program, the progressive third-party people would in fact get the best response from the audiences. And people would say, you know, you guys make a lot of sense. And then you go up to them and say, you're going to vote for us? And they say, oh, of course we're not going to vote for you. You can't win. You're going to vote for the Democrat. You're a much better candidate. Everything you're saying is true, but we can't waste our vote. Waste our vote was the expression. So if there's any term that drives me crazy, is this quote-unquote waste our vote.
This is not a governor's race. It's not a state legislative race. This is the presidency of the United States. And I would say to those people out there who are thinking of the protest vote, think about what the country looks like and whether you're comfortable of 4 years of a Trump presidency.
What we need in this country is what Jackson calls a rainbow coalition. But it has to be done outside of the Democratic Party.
Let us elect Hillary Clinton as president, and the day after, let us mobilize millions of people around the progressive agenda, which, by the way, was passed, as you know, in the Democratic platform. We worked very hard on that. The most progressive platform in the history of American politics, and say to Secretary Clinton, let us work together to implement that platform. That's where we got to go.
But my own feeling is the arguments of working within the Democratic Party and without go as follows. The argument for working within the Democratic Party is that people say, well, that's where the working class is, that's where the unions are, let's stay within that. People are familiar with it. That's been their home for many, many years. There's truth to that, some truth to that. The argument against working within the Democratic Party is that for millions of Americans, both parties are looked upon with derision, with disrespect. Polls show that half the American people don't even know the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party. And I can tell you very honestly, this is just as a practical politician, which is what I am, when I campaigned in Vermont, and I don't think Vermont is terribly different in this respect than any other state in the Union. You know, we went all over the state and we shook probably 30, 40,000 hands. I don't think that more than a dozen times people came up to me and said, Bernie, I can't vote for you because I'm a really strong Democrat and I believe in the Democratic Party, or I'm a strong Republican and I believe in the Republican Party. They don't. I think what ends up happening is people don't see much of a choice. There's the option, you know, you got the Democrats, Republicans, sometimes this one's a little bit worse, sometimes this one's a little bit better. But I think that by standing up and telling the truth, that both parties are controlled by big money, which is clearly the case, that neither party, and I don't want to, and I should tell you, by the way, that within the Congress and in the Democrats, you have a lot of good people, and I'm not here to put them down, and you know their names, good people who year after year have fought the good fight. But I think that nationally, the party has, on issue after issue, sold out so many times that if you go before the people and say, hey, I'm a Democrat, you don't usually generate a lot of enthusiasm.
Now, as you saw right there, that was in 1991 and 2016. There are some people that I was noticing in the comment section of that video that were immediately saying, oh, Bernie Sanders is sold out. He's in league with Hillary Clinton and the establishment now. I know you were a very big Bernie Sanders supporter, and you still are. How do you see the juxtaposition of, as he said, he's shaking hands with 20, 30,000 people that are saying, we'd love to vote for you, but you have no chance, to now saying basically the same thing that they're saying, or were saying?
Well, he made a pledge before the primaries that he would support the winner of the primaries. That's what he said, and he stuck to his word.
Okay.
Now, having said that, he has done some campaigning for Hillary Clinton, but he spent the majority of his time out stumping for people that are good progressive candidates. Right next door in New York State, Zephyr Teachout in New York's 19th Congressional District. Great candidate. I've known her since 2004. I met her through the Howard Dean campaign. And he's stumping for folks that are true progressive candidates. He stumped for the opponent for Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida, who did not prevail over a very popular Debbie Wasserman Schultz in a primary, but put up a good fight. And he's been out there spending the majority of his time stumping for folks that he and I and the rest of his supporters can believe in, and spending a little time. However, I was at an event up in New Paltz, New York for Zephyr Teachout a couple of Fridays ago, and Bernie led off and he spoke about all the things that Bernie Sanders has been speaking about, all the economic issues and all the cultural issues and the social issues and the important issues that pretty much didn't get talked about in the first primary, and probably the first debate, and probably won't be talked about in the second or the third. He talked about all those things, and then Zephyr Teachout came out and spoke about why she's running and what her platform is. And then the next day, the Washington Post ran an article and basically said that Bernie Sanders was there stumping for Hillary Clinton. Flat out lie. Here's the number of times that the name Hillary Clinton was mentioned in the 10 or 15 minutes that Bernie Sanders spoke and the 10 or 15 minutes that Zephyr Teachout spoke. See that number right there? Zippo. Never was she mentioned. But the New York Times and the Washington Post and these other media outlets, and I no doubt Fox probably said the same thing, because they like the two candidates because they're both corporate candidates. Probably saying the same thing, that they'll twist a story around so much that you wouldn't believe it about what's going on in the world and what Bernie Sanders is doing. Bernie's out there supporting good progressive candidates, and that's where his best use time is. After the election, as he mentioned, after the election, we're going to look back and go forward, and it might very well be with a third party, because there's a very good chance of a coalition, believe it or not, a coalition between two very disparate groups in America, libertarians and liberals, progressives, if you will. And you saw that rear its head a couple days ago when the 9/11 bill, which allows American citizens to sue, amongst others, Saudi Arabia, because
Obama vetoed. But
which he did, and I understand why he vetoed it. I understand completely why he vetoed it, because there are definite potential negative ramifications from that. And the United States has to maintain a good relationship with a country which owns about, I don't know, however many billions of dollars of debt that the United States has out there. If Saudi Arabia were to turn around and sell off all their debt, it would have not a disastrous effect on our economy, but it would not be a very good effect on our economy. So I understand why he vetoed it, but at the same time, I'm very happy that these two disparate groups, the libertarians and liberals, and pretty much everybody in the Senate, got together and overrode his veto. And in the House, it was a huge override of his veto. And I think it's a very good thing, because it allows some amount of fairness and justice for the families of the 9/11 victims. What that will do worldwide is it will also give Iraqi citizens whose city of Baghdad was bombed with bunker buster bombs on March 13th, 2003. And you could talk about September 11th, 2001, where 3,000 citizens, mostly Americans, were murdered. But then look at March 19th, 2003.
Was it March 19th or 13th? 'Cause I think you said 13th the first time.
Might be I think it was the 19th.
Okay.
When the United States began its aerial assault of Baghdad, and at the very least, the smallest estimate of casualties, of people murdered. And I'll say murdered because that's what it was. Killed, if you will, if you want to say killed. The smallest estimate of people killed during shock and awe in Baghdad was 6,800 people. I'm going to guesstimate it as being much higher because when you drop bunker buster bombs seeking out one person, Saddam Hussein, when you drop these bombs on a major city, on a populated, culturally very active city, you're going to kill an awful lot of people. It's almost like,
Well, it was recently.
I compare it to Dresden.
I was going to say, was it last year or early this year where they blew up a hospital
Yeah.
that had men, women, and children
Yeah.
that had done nothing wrong to get one terrorist?
Yeah, those are the.
And then nobody got any jail time or any repercussions from it because we thought he might have been in there.
These are the folks that are going to be sued. People that do all these dastardly deeds, not just Saudi Arabia, but whenever you have an act of terror, whether it be 14 Saudi hijackers amongst 19 hijackers flying jets into buildings and then into Pentagon, into the World Trade Towers, whether it's that or whether it's people sending drones in to kill civilians, you're going to have the opportunity for individuals to sue the government that perpetrated the act.
Well, I was about to say, who would be sued? Because if, say, Sergeant whatever is the one who shot the bomb that hit the hospital, would he be sued, or would the person who gave him the order?
If you can identify the individuals, certainly I think that they would be named in a lawsuit. But
because a lot of times, I hate to put it this way, but they're just following orders, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Because the soldier there on the front line may not know, it's a hospital, or may not know anything. So he's still culpable in the fact that he actually shot the bomb. But I wouldn't say that he's as culpable as the guy who has the litany of intelligence to say, oh, he's over here, no, he's over there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And it's the same situation as you find when those of us that oppose military actions, starting with Vietnam and probably going back prior to that, we have never been against the troops that are sent. Although if they were to say, no, I'm not going to go, then maybe you wouldn't have as much in the way of warfare. But it's the act of the generals and the politicians, right on up to the President of the United States, whether it be Barack Obama or George Bush or any of the ones that came before him. Those are the ones that are most culpable, not the soldiers who are following orders.
Okay. And to get back to the third-party ticket, as we were talking about, there were a lot of people, I don't know if you were one of them, that were hoping that Bernie Sanders would kind of splinter off, go back into the independent scene. I know Jill Stein at one point was saying she would have no problem stepping down and letting Bernie Sanders run into the Green Party. But I think he was afraid of splitting the vote and possibly getting Trump, as he said in the video there, possibly getting Trump elected. Would you have been supportive of that, or would you have seen that splinter off more of the progressive vote versus Hillary Clinton and versus him?
I never thought that he would do that, simply because he said from day one that he would not do that he would support the candidate, whoever it was. And some of my folks out of anger and frustration have said, well, look what the Democratic Party did to undermine his candidacy. I understand their feelings, but I knew he would stick with what he said, and he has, and I accept that completely. I bear no ill will, no malice toward Bernie Sanders for doing what he said he was going to do. I'm waiting to see what's going to happen the day after the election, and I'm presuming that regardless of what the corporate polls are saying about this back and forth, one's ahead one day, the other one's ahead the next day, and it's back and forth. Yeah. And both candidates in both parties use the fear of the other party's candidate becoming president to reach out and say, oh, by the way, could you send us some money? Which they will be spending on advertising on the media that are running the polls in order to create this, I think, illusion of there being any chance that there's, whatever you want to call them, misogynist, racist, ideologue, xenophobe.
But Donald Trump is self-funding.
No, but he said he was going to be. Of course he said he was going to be. But that's one of the things that went by the wayside when his charities haven't even been self-funding. His charities have spent literally $250,000 defending his corporations from lawsuits. I mean, you could go on and on about how horrible this guy is, and you'd be right. But I'm not sure if that's a reason necessarily to vote for any candidate that you don't particularly like, and that's why my vote is not going to be, let's just say it's not going to be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, because I don't like either one of them. And I can't vote for either one of them, and I will not buy into the fear, the argument of fear that, 2000, Ralph Nader ran, and Ralph Nader made George Bush president because because George Bush won New Hampshire and Florida.
I think he got 77,000 votes.
Because of Ralph Nader. Florida, Al Gore lost because of the following things. First of all, he didn't carry his own state. That would have made him president if he had carried Tennessee. Secondly, in Florida, let's go down the list of reasons why George Bush won Florida. Let's start with the butterfly ballot in Palm Beach County, where you had a predominantly Jewish population, because of the way the configuration of the ballot, thought they were voting for Gore, and Joe Lieberman ended up accidentally voting for a neo-Nazi, Pat Buchanan, because of the way the ballot was configured. You couldn't tell, you weren't exactly sure, and I'm not giving older people an out on this, that they don't understand the ballot as well as we younger folks. But a lot of people voted for Pat Buchanan that thought they were voting for Al Gore and Joe Lieberman. Then you had, I believe, about 50,000 military overseas ballots that came in. They weren't certified. There was nothing to indicate that they were actually legal, legitimate ballots. But people said, oh, no, we can't not count these ballots. I mean, how can we not count our service people's ballots? Well, if they weren't legitimate ballots, you don't count them. Simple as that. So you put those ahead of Ralph Nader being in a position. And keep in mind that a lot of folks that voted for Ralph Nader, the majority of them, I'm going to go out and say, out as far as to say the majority of Ralph Nader's supporters in Florida, if they didn't have Ralph Nader on the ballot, they wouldn't have voted. So that's not taking a vote away from Al Gore. A lot of Ralph Nader's, smaller percentage of Ralph Nader's voters would have voted for Al Gore. Some of Ralph Nader's voters would have voted for George Bush. So you really can't make the argument that Ralph Nader made much of any difference, let alone a difference that superseded those other two situations, the butterfly ballot and the military ballots. That's why Gore lost.
Well, speaking, as you had said, you don't see yourself voting for Trump or Hillary, as I don't either. And I don't, as you said, I don't see it as a protest vote, because I don't see either candidate espousing any views that I would see as appropriate with what I'm looking to do, or how I'm looking to try to move the country forward. I do see Gary Johnson, and to a lesser extent, Jill Stein, who some say is to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Left, right. We could talk about left and right forever, but you're right. That's the perception.
But would you see yourself voting for Jill Stein?
I plan to vote for Jill Stein.
Okay.
Because I think of the four candidates, she's the best.
What are some of the positions that she's hold that are linking you to her?
She's not a hawk.
Okay.
She believes in universal health care for all, as Bernie. She really, in fact, supports all of the things that got Bernie Sanders 45% of the delegates in the Democratic primaries. She's basically as close to Bernie Sanders as you can get. Now, Bernie Sanders was my candidate because he was the closest candidate to the candidate that I would have liked to have seen in the first place for the Democratic Party, and that would be Elizabeth Warren.
Okay.
Elizabeth Warren, everybody says the same thing with her. She couldn't win. Well, everybody said Bernie Sanders couldn't win, so we should have Hillary Clinton. But during the entire primaries, the media did head-to-head polling matchups, Republican candidate versus Democratic Party candidate. They did it virtually all 20 or so of the Republican candidates individually against the two, well, quickly whittled down to two Democratic candidates, Sanders and Clinton. And in every one of those polls, head-to-head matchups, Bernie Sanders outperformed Hillary Clinton against every single Republican candidate. Most of all against Donald Trump. So the Democratic Party had a chance to have their best candidate. If they had all open primaries where folks that were, we'll call them Democratic Party members in training, unaffiliated voters. And of course, you know, unaffiliated voters are more than half of American voters that reject both the Democratic and the Republican Party and declare themselves to be neutral.
And it's the only time into election season that really the Republicans and the Democrats give a flying rip about the unaffiliated parties.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
pretty much. But if all the Democratic Party caucuses and primaries had been open to people that I would call Democratic Party members in training, people that lean toward the Democratic Party but are not registered Democrats, Bernie Sanders would have been the candidate. Simple as that. You could look at the numbers, you could figure that out pretty easily.
Well, I've seen some reports that say if every single person voted, as we talked about earlier, how they're trying to disenfranchise certain groups, that the Democratic Party or the progressive agenda would easily sway over the next 100 years or so. Do you see, now how do you see Jill Stein kind of panning out in this kind of four-horse race? Because as far as I know, those are the four people that will be on the ballot in Connecticut. I don't know if Darrell Castle will be, but Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton will be the four that I know, because she got on the ballot in Connecticut, right?
Yep.
Okay, I know there were 3 states that were write-in.
She has 3 states where she could only be on as a write-in because they shut the door on being on the ballot a year ago, let's say. It was a long time ago, and so Jill Stein got on the ballot as literally in 47 states plus the District of Columbia. There are a couple of states that are still in litigation about that, but presumably she'll be on in 47 states plus the District of Columbia. Now, having said that, I'm going to ask folks in the audience that talk about progressive, the term progressive and what it means. Well, my question to you is, are you a progressive or are you a regressive? And I think all of us would say, well, I don't think we're regressive, except for the guy for the Republicans that wants to make America great again, wants to take America back to some point in our history, like
A lot of times it doesn't even exist.
Judge Antonin Scalia talked about being an originalist. And if you're an originalist, then I guess you're in favor of slavery. You think slavery should come back. Maybe you ought to not have women voting, and some other things that have been taken out and changed by progressives in America over our 240 years. There were pretty bad things, and I think America, it's safe to say, is a lot better country now than it was before women were allowed to vote. It's a lot better country than it was when we had slavery, and a number of other things.
Now we essentially have instituted slavery where you're not as vocal about, oh, I don't want to rent to this black couple, or I don't want to do this, but I'll word it in such a way that it makes it seem like, oh, their credit was denied or this happened, but I still am not going to, rent or hire a black guy or a Mexican guy or what have you.
And in housing, I see this not in the sale of a home anymore, although you only have to go back about 30 or 40 years when there was a large real estate company, I believe Minnesota was their principal state, that got caught by our federal government when they would write a contract and offer to purchase, and it came from a black couple or a black family or a black individual, they would use a different colored pen. So when they handed the document over to the agent representing the buyer knew that the person that was going to buy their home was maybe somebody they didn't want to sell to for fear of harming their neighbors or whatever. So,
well, if they're selling the house, what do they care about their neighbors at that point?
And I think that's pretty much the case nowadays. But in rental housing, You still see a lot of landlords that want to discriminate based on, well, they can't discriminate on Section 8 because Section 8 is a viable source of income. And you can't discriminate against someone whose part of their income is through a housing subsidy. You can't discriminate against a woman or a couple where the woman is getting alimony or child support, which is a viable source of income. Anything that's a viable source of income is a viable source of income, and you cannot legally discriminate. Do landlords try to do that? Sometimes they do. But we stay pretty much on top of that, and we advise them up front that we cannot represent them if they want to discriminate. If they want to do something that's illegal, they're going to have to try it on their own without the help of real estate brokers. And they're probably, certainly as much, maybe more likely to be caught by what we call a tester, someone checking out the behavior of real estate brokers and the landlords that they may or may not represent.
Well, getting back to the election here, how do you see, as I said, do you see Jill Stein picking up any states? Do you see her being able to pull all of Bernie Sanders' supporters?
Can I make a quick answer to that? No.
Okay.
No, but
because, like I said, at the moment she's pulling around 2 to 4%
Yep.
of a national.
Yep.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm going to say that the idea that Jill Stein could cost Hillary Clinton the election are just foofra, complete nonsense. Because on the Republican side,
I don't know if I can handle such horrible language like that.
Okay. On the Republican side, I think you're going to see a lot of libertarian Republicans and a lot of mainstream Republicans that are going to vote for Gary Johnson because of the travesty that is Donald Trump.
Actually, speaking of Donald Trump, I don't know how much time we have left, but I've got about a minute or so video that I wanted to get to. This is of a recent Glenn Beck interview that had a Donald Trump supporter. We had about 5 minutes. That had a Donald Trump supporter that was saying something interesting. And I've never really been a big fan of Glenn Beck, but he's moved more centrist over the past year or so.
Has he really?
Well, he's a little more.
I don't watch him. I don't know. I'm asking you.
Neither have I. But I mean, he's a little more in favor of Black Lives Matter and a few other things. But
interesting. So he's a little bit more libertarian, because libertarians will generically and generally be representative of people that are trod on by the government, whether it be federal, state, or local government, or local police departments as part of local governments. They're supportive of folks that are trod on.
But this is about a minute or so long, and this should be interesting.
Does he mean it, or is he just saying these things like a politician?
He's just saying these things at this moment, and I have no problems admitting that to get elected.
He was taking calls, because he was for Cruz. He was taking calls from me.
As far as I'm concerned, as long as he does the basic things, the foundational things, which is build a wall, he's not going to have people like me coming after him. Because if he doesn't do what he said.
So if he doesn't build a wall, like China, then he's in trouble. It's the wall that is your line. Okay.
Oh, he's in so much trouble you don't even understand the backlash of us.
Oh, I think I do.
Once we're so frustrated and angry and tired of all the political stuff, we're going to come after him personally. You know what I mean? We're going to get him.
I don't know what you mean. Hang on. What does that mean?
Impeach him?
You know, the most peaceful way that you can get rid of a president
is impeach him.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. There's not violence when you say coming after him personally.
Well, hey, you yourself said he's condoned violence in the past, hasn't he?
No, I don't think that it's good.
It's not towards him. He has condoned violence.
Yeah.
That's
toward us. Yeah.
Oh, towards people at the rallies.
He's appealing to people who are very frustrated and angry. Their frustration and anger can only be subsided if he makes his promises true. And he has a lot on his shoulders. Maybe he himself doesn't even know how much.
Okay.
But if he doesn't come through for us, he's going to have bigger problems than what you know.
Okay, Nate.
Well, obviously,
thank you for one of the spookiest phone calls I think I've ever received.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump might be have Nate on his back at this point, but I can almost see it, because he's frustrated so many people to a fever pitch, where he's gotten There was a couple of guys, I think it was in Boston, they beat up a homeless Mexican guy. There were people spitting on other people, beating them at Trump rallies, among various other things.
Well, he hasn't promised his people a chicken in every pot like traditionally candidates tend to do, but he's certainly promised his supporters a dead Mexican in every pot. Or a Mexican being chucked over a wall, a 20-foot wall, to his supporters. And no, he won't deliver on that. He can't deliver on that, and he won't even try.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would cause some problems with his supporters, I imagine.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to try to get out in the last couple minutes?
No, I think after the election, no matter which candidate wins, it's going to be pretty much nonstop impeachment from a lot of different directions. And I think it's very possible, I think it's extremely possible, that if Trump wins, that he won't last his entire 4 years as President of the United States, because he'll do so many outrageous things that Clinton will have the threat of impeachment. Well, you know, it's been the same thing with President Obama. You know, there'll be and the Benghazi, the 40 or 50 or 60 or however many Benghazi hearings that there have been, that all came to the conclusion that she did nothing wrong.
But it's the next one that'll conclude that she did something wrong.
Yeah, but it'll be nonstop hearings about everything that you can imagine against a President Hillary Clinton, and the government will be just pretty much stalled and nothing will happen. And you know, I guess some people say that's how America works best, is because nothing ever really happens. That, you know, you never see a real changing of the guard, and there's never any extremities that find their way into government. So maybe that's a safer way for a country to be than they used to say in Central America, 45 RPM, revolutions per minute.
Well, we have about 30 seconds left. What I would like to say is thank you to David Stevenson for coming down.
My pleasure.
I'd like to say thank you for tuning in. Ladies and gentlemen, hopefully whoever you vote for is actually the candidate you want and not the candidate that you hate less than the other candidate, be it Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton, or Donald Trump. With that, ladies